Okay, the webinar is now live.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Environmental Quality Commission's May 19th meeting. So this is obviously a teleconference meeting with EQC members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I am going to take a moment to introduce both the city staff and the commissioners. So commissioners, if you, we're going to do this roll call. So if you can just raise your hand or say aye when I call your name. So we have Commissioner Elkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Cabot.
Aye.
Commissioner London.
Aye.
Commissioner Martin.
Aye.
And Commissioner Gaylor.
Aye.
And I know, and my name is Ryan Price. I am the chair of the Environmental Quality Commission. I know we have Commissioner Payne who will join us in about 15 minutes. And then we also are joined by our staff liaison, sustainability manager, Rebecca Lucky. Ms. Lucky, would you please provide the instructions to both EQC members and members of the public regarding the public comment and how the meeting will proceed?
Yes, thank you, Chair Price and members of the Environmental Quality Commission. Welcome everyone to the May 19th regular meeting of the Environmental Quality Commission, and thank you for attending. At this time, we ask that the members of the EQC please remain on screen for the duration of the meeting. You'll be able to control your own webcams and microphones. Staff will engage webcams and microphones to make presentations and to respond to members of the EQC. For the members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, after the chair calls for public comment on an item you wish to speak on, please engage the raised hand feature that is next to your name in the participants list. I will then have the ability to open your microphone and you can provide your public comment to the Environmental Quality Commission for up to 3 minutes. For those members of the public who are calling in from a landline or a cell phone, you can press *9 to raise your virtual hand, and I'll be able to also unmute you at that time to make your public comment. So this concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucky. Rebecca, with that, do we have any public comment on the at this time?
Thank you, Chair Price. So at this time, if a member of the public who is in attendance would like to make public comment on an item that is not on the agenda, please do raise your hand that is next to your name in the participant list. And again, if you're on a landline or a cell phone, you can press *9. And with that, I do not see any hands raised at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. That means that we can proceed into the regular business section of our meeting. So under the regular business, the EQC considers providing advice to City Council on sustainability policy matters or administrative actions that require City Council decisions. So with that, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the April 21st, 2021 meeting minutes. Does anybody have a clarifying question regarding the April 21st meeting minutes? Yes, Commissioner Elkins.
I just wanted to, let's see, down in E1, it says Commissioner Martin Elkins provided information. And I know that I did, but I can't remember if Commissioner Martin also did. So I don't know if that should just be Commissioners Martin and Elkins, or whether it just should be Commissioner Elkins.
And Deb, it's under reports and announcements.
Yeah, that's definitely was Commissioner Elkins. Let me see here. The leaf blowers, right?
Right. Regarding
yeah, I think that's a typo.
Bill. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that should say Commissioner Elkins.
Okay.
Good catch.
That is all I have.
Are there any other clarifying questions? And sorry, I have two screens, so when I look to the side, I'm looking at the other screen. But I think it looks awkward in the meeting, so I apologize. Okay, no other clarifying questions. Then, Rebecca, do we have any public comment on this agenda item at this time? I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. So at this time, if there's any members of the public who would like to make a public comment on approving the April 21st, 2021 minutes, please raise your hand using the feature next to your name in the participant list. Or again, if you're on a cell phone or a landline, you can press *9 and I'll be able to unmute you.
Thank you.
And with that, I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Thank you. So now that we've concluded the public comment, are there any items of discussion related to the meeting minutes? I don't see any hands. I don't see anybody looking to speak. That being said, given Commissioner Elkins' edit on the minutes, is there anybody, do we feel like we're ready to make a motion regarding the minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes with the one change requested by Commissioner Elkins.
Is there a second?
I can second that.
Thank you. And then we will, we can vote via roll call led by Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair Price. So the motion is to approve the April 21st, 2021 minutes. Motion by Gillard and seconded by Elkins. I'll take roll call for your approval. Please indicate through your voice that you approve so that I can record the minutes properly. I'll start with who's on the top of my screen. So Commissioner Cabot.
Aye.
Commissioner Elkins.
Aye.
Commissioner Price. Commissioner Price.
Aye. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Martin.
Aye.
Commissioner Gillard.
Aye.
Commissioner London.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you.
We can now continue to the next item on the agenda. And I apologize, I clicked through to look at the minutes and I have to bring up the agenda again. The next item is the informational update from Canopy on the tree planting permit condition resulting from the 1000 El Camino Real Heritage Tree Removal Permit. So I would like to introduce Catherine Martineau, the Executive Director of Canopy, and Maya, who is the Community Forestry Manager for Canopy, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair Price. I'm not sure whether Maya Briones has been promoted yet. I can't see her on my screen, so I'm not 100% sure. Maya, could you please, oh, here, well, let's see.
She might be coming in now.
She might be.
Yeah, I promoted, it looks
Maya.
like under the same name. Yeah, there we go.
They're the same name. So that's confusing. Oh, here she is.
It's been corrected. She's got it.
Excellent.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Rebecca, I see on your screen that you have the presentation, but actually I think it might be good if you allow us that Maya share her screen, and this way when she goes through the presentation, she will be able to advance the slides. It's just a few slides. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'll stop sharing your screen. Can everyone see this?
We can.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Very good. Well, again, I want to thank the Chair Price and the rest of the commissioners for inviting us today. We have been in touch with the city arborist, Christian, who's also on the call, and he told us that you would appreciate an update on this project. So this is why we are here today. Just a second, please go back.
Sorry.
Thank you, no problem. One thing that I was wondering is whether Christian would like to give a little bit of a reminder of what this project, the origin of the project, before we go into the actual implementation of the program, unless that's not necessary, in which case we can just start.
I think I'm comfortable moving forward because
Okay.
we have talked about that. We just talked about this item last meeting as a reminder. And so I'm okay moving forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you so
And
much.
I just one quick comment. I just think it maybe if I'm not sure who we have on in the public, who may or may not have been at our last meeting, but my recollection of this is the project for the trees that came down on El Camino a couple years ago. There was a motion to move forward with a replanting of, and don't quote me, maybe 70 trees, 75 trees, and that this is the donation and outcome of that. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't quite remember myself how many trees on site were replanted as part of the mitigation plan for the removals of some pretty major coast redwoods on El Camino. So there was a part of the mitigation was replanting a certain number of trees on site. And I think, and there was a ratio. So a number of trees were removed, and the developer there had to plant 2 or 3 trees. Maybe Christian can be more specific about this. But then there was also a contribution that was made by J.B. Madison in order to plant more trees in the community. And we, at the time, we worked with Christian and J.B. Madison and Sarah Regis, who are representing, working for J.B. Madison, in order to come up with a program that would bring trees in the community, and especially in the Bellhaven neighborhood, which has a much lower tree canopy cover than the rest of Menlo Park. So that was kind of the gist of it. And about 2 years ago, we had worked with both Sarah Regis and the city with Christian to put together a scope of work and an MOU that defined what we were going to do and how and when. And now we're reporting on what we've done and where we're going next, because of course everything was pretty disrupted because of the pandemic. This said, my colleague here, Maya Briones, is Canopy's Community Forestry Manager in charge of a program that we call what do we call our program?
Branching out.
Branching out. Sorry about that. A blank. Branching out, which is specifically to plant more trees and increase tree canopy cover in the communities of Bellhaven, East Palo Alto, and certain areas of North Fair Oaks. So with this program, we aim at bringing the benefits of the many benefits of a richer tree canopy cover to parts of our region in the Mid-Peninsula that have not traditionally, received those benefits. So I think now, Maya, I'm ready. You can turn the page and start your presentation.
Great, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. So as Catherine mentioned, in our MOU, we had agreed to plant 62 trees, and there were certain areas dedicated to receive these trees. In the original scope, 22 24-inch box trees were to be planted at some parks, and then the rest of the 40 trees, which could be at a 15-gallon standard planting size, could be planted elsewhere in the Bellhaven community and near vicinity. What we are here to talk to you today is about what we've been able to achieve so far, which is a sum of 33 trees total, broken down into 19 trees at parks and 14 in the Bellhaven neighborhood. So I'll tell you a little bit about our Burgess Park planting on March 27th, 2021. It was quite a busy day for us. We had multiple events going, all which went really well. First off, we celebrated Arbor Day with the City of Menlo Park, which was live streamed for the community. There were a certain amount of guests wearing masks and being socially distant at the event, including Mayor Drew Combs, and we planted a ceremonial mayor's tree, which was a valley oak, for Mayor Combs at this event. And then sort of separately, we had the planting event, which was 12 24-inch box trees. 24-inch box trees, for those who don't know, are quite large. So it actually took 3 days of prep to get all these trees in the ground. So the 2 days before the planting, Canopy staff and a few volunteers were out there prepping the soil, digging the holes. And then the larger community planting event that was still COVID safe with masks, temperature checks, social distancing, and plenty of hand washing stations happened on the Saturday, March 27th. All of the 12 trees that we planted were native, which is really exciting for Canopy. We don't always get to plant native trees, but we were really excited that that was part of the planting plan. And we had 20 community volunteers. And in this picture, we have the ever photogenic Dan Hoffman and his wife, Catherine. You'll see them throughout the presentation, and our longtime volunteer, Marty Degler, in the back. And so here's a shot right in front of the mayor's tree, which I'll show you another picture of it later, just to show everyone who was there. Masked up was Matt Mattinson, Christian Bonner, city arborist, Scott Johnson, Starla Jerome Robinson, Josie Gaillard, Catherine Martineau, and Mayor Drew Combs. So here are just some other photos of the event. In our report is an attached Flickr album if anyone is interested in seeing more, but in the center there is the mayor's tree that was prepped the day before by our wonderful volunteers. And it was really just a really successful day, despite the soil being very difficult and the size of the trees being a bit of a challenge. We also planted at Hamilton Park. I had to break this up into 2 separate planting events because I couldn't source quality trees the first time around, but that worked out just fine. During COVID, we're not having as many volunteers participate in order to maintain social distancing, so it's okay to have a smaller event and some smaller scope of work. So in total, though, with both events, we planted 7 24-inch box trees in Hamilton Park with 20 community volunteers that came out to plant with us. We were able to connect with a woman named Susan who publishes Bellhaven information on the website belhavennews.com. And so there's some coverage there, a brief article and some photos of that event as well. And so, again, a small group of volunteers, but small but mighty, and it was able to get a lot of work done, again, despite some difficulty with the soil and the size of the trees. And so we had some families come out to this event with their kids, which was really exciting. And it was a beautiful day, and we have on the middle the Ceres Regis group right up there with the helmets. They came out to the first part of the planting, which was fantastic. And finally, we had our neighborhood planting on Pierce Road. We worked with the City of Menlo Park, specifically the engineering department, who was basically renovating the road by adding sidewalks and that met ADA requirements. And after that happened, we canvassed quite a bit to try to get the residents in this community to accept trees. It's not on their property. They're actually in the public right of way, but it appears to be behind the property line where fences are. So we wanted to get resident buy-in, mostly because we want the residents to water the trees. Canopy provides 3 years of free tree care, and we obviously buy and plant the trees for free. But watering is usually needs to be agreed upon by whatever tree steward is on site. And so that was a challenge during COVID. It's always a challenge, I will say, but it was a challenge during COVID to get a lot of people to say yes. And the street is mostly made of multi-unit properties, so it just took some connection with the property owners. But we did get 14 trees planted, which is really great. And we had 12 community volunteers join us on that day back in December. And here's our group again of volunteers. And people were really happy this day. I think people were really excited this was the first planting of the 62 Trees project. Not the kickoff we envisioned, but it was exciting nonetheless. We had a city engineer, Scott Jaw, in the middle there join us, which was really nice. And people just had a really good time. And so our plan to complete the project, the 29 remaining trees, is to continue outreach in Belhaven neighborhoods, and as well as connect with Belhaven Elementary School and all 5 preschool to see if we can plant any trees on their campuses. We have obtained an extension to continue this project through the calendar year, which we were very gracious for. And we look forward to wrapping this project up when the planting season begins again in late September, early August. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ask clarifying questions. I just want to add from the information we've previously received that there were 14 trees planted at the Thousand El Camino Real site. So in addition to the 62 trees that are part of the Canopy replanting throughout Menlo Park, 14 trees were also planted on site. And so that was the agreed upon plan as part of the removal of the 7 redwood trees from 1,000 El Camino. So with that, does any commissioners have clarifying questions? It looks like we have one from Tom.
It wasn't really a question. I was just going to thank Catherine and Maya for presenting all this great information about the efforts. It's so nice to see the community coming together and working on increasing the tree count after that tough decision that had to be made.
Agreed.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, by the way. It's been a while that we haven't seen anyone.
Exactly.
Soon.
Yeah, I just wanted to also echo what Tom said. This is great work. It's really, really rewarding and nice to see this, because I know many of us on the commission who were involved in that. That was a very difficult tree appeal, probably the most difficult one I've ever been in. And I thought that you know, it's just really nice to see that come to fruition, that honoring that nice commitment that was made to, I think, yeah, you're right, it's like 76 trees or so. So it looks like that's been achieved. And I would just recommend that that's a really nice piece to share with our community. And so I would suggest that maybe just even putting out a little article or a press release on the website or whatever it is to kind of, you know, because we're here in the smaller audience, but I would really love a broader audience to know about it, because we had quite a few citizens involved in that. There's at least it was a packed town hall. So I think that a wider distribution of communication on these efforts would be really welcome and appreciated by the community.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. And if I may, it would be great if that communication also gave, a Canopy, either Maya's email address, or maybe we can provide another email address, because Maya's actually retiring from Canopy at the end of the summer. So if we could have something in there for people, especially in Bellhaven, to contact us if they want trees, because that has been, as Maya described, that has been the big challenge, is during the outreach, we were not able to have kind of a festive kickoff event as we had planned to do, inviting neighbors and answering their questions and registering people to get trees. So that would be helpful. Another detail that I wanted to share also is that we received the contribution from Mattison up front. And so because we're a nonprofit, there are ways to account for funds that are restricted to a specific project. So this amount of money has been entered as restricted fund, and we release those funds as we go. So after on a quarterly basis, after the work has been done, we release the equivalent amount of money. So this is just to reassure you that the money has not been spent by Canopy on something else. So yes, so that's an advantage of this very complicated nonprofit accounting that we're dealing with every day.
Maybe just quickly to finish up on that, then I don't know if this is more a question for Rebecca, but Rebecca, can we maybe like somehow capture the action item of, I don't know who could do such a press release or write up. Do you?
Can we hold that for the discussion when we talk about action items, because we still haven't taken public comment yet?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a clarifying question, Josie?
I do. First of all, I went to the event on Arbor Day, and I thought everything seemed really well run. So great job. And it is heartening to see all the great photos. So thank you, Maya, for providing those. So clarifying question is, it's wonderful that these are native trees. How are they going to hold up with more drought, et cetera? Like, were they chosen with climate change in mind? I'm just noticing as I drive around during our current drought, all the redwood trees that are dead or dying. Right. And I know you guys don't plant redwood trees for that reason, but will they survive, increasing drought and higher heat?
So Canopy, when we do our own plantings, always approaches with climate resilient species. Native trees tend to be climate resilient, but there are plenty of others that do better in the urban environment. Not all the trees we planted in total were native. Really, the only native ones were at Burgess Park. Everything else was a non-native species. Golden rain trees were planted along Pierce Road with a couple Chinese pistache, and then Hamilton Park had a couple of native species and one non-native oak. That non-native oak is an eastern species and a little thirsty. So these trees were chosen by the city. So we went with their planting plan, whatever they gave us. But, you know, we trust the city to be mindful about climate change, and the species, as far as I know, are fairly drought tolerant, and if not drought tolerant, at least very resistant to other urban factors like air pollution and that sort of thing.
Okay. And my second question was, I noticed in the report that there was a watering issues. Are those, you know, the trees that were sort of struggling? I know one died, but are they coming back? And do you feel like those issues can be overcome?
Yeah, so Pierce Road was particularly difficult for many reasons. One, because there was a misconception by residents that they thought that it looked like it was their property to them because it was behind fences, even though that technically was public right of way. So there was that concern where a lot of landlords weren't interested. And the other concerns were really that I only could talk to certain landlords who are a little difficult. It's hard for me to reach them sometimes. And it's really up to their landscapers rather than their residents to connect the trees to water. So despite the agreements that I got originally, not all the trees have been watered regularly. So we try to come out once a month to check to water them. They are starting to bounce back, but they are struggling a bit. They're not getting enough water at this point, especially with the drought. I will add that that's a big part. Even though we planted them in December, hoping for some spring rain, we really didn't get any. And so that is playing a big part in the trees struggling. All trees, no matter if they're technically drought tolerant or not, at this stage in their life when they're just in the soil and they're getting suited to their new environment, can go through a phase of shock if they're not watered properly, or if there's any other kind of factors that if they're pruned early or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other clarifying questions before we open up for public comment? And just as a reminder, when people do share their public comment, people have 3 minutes to share their public comment. But I just want to remind our guests that that does not mean that you directly then respond to the question at hand. So Ms. Lucky, with that, do we have any public comments on this item at this time?
Thank you, Chair Price. So at this time, if there are any members of the public that wish to speak on this agenda item, please raise your hand. It's next to your name. And if you are on a cell phone or landline, please press *9 and I'll be able to unmute you as well. And with that, I do have one hand raised by Mr. Peter Edmonds. And Mr. Edmonds, I have unmuted you, so you should be able to speak. You might have to unmute yourself as well.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Lucky. Chair Price and members of the Commission. I'm very glad to have seen that the contractor at Canopy has made a progress report on this activity and has made considerable progress, which is very gratifying. I was one of the appellants opposed to the felling of the 7 heritage redwood trees at the 1000 El Camino site, as many of you know. And I was also present at the last meeting of the City Council where this topic was considered. And that is why I think there's been one deplorable omission from both this report and the ceremony on Arbor Day, which was to give appropriate credit to former Mayor Müller, who is totally responsible, in my opinion, for having this benefit to the city because it's only due to his quick thinking and negotiating ability during that council meeting that the sum which was donated by Madison company or family has been available. And I feel that this is an omission that should be remedied. For example, by having a tree dedicated to him, since you've already dedicated one to the current mayor. And I'd make that suggestion to the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edmonds. We appreciate your feedback and your recommendation of considering a tree in honor to former Mayor Mueller for his contribution to the restorative planting that's happened throughout the city as a result of the tenuous removal of the 7 redwood trees at 1000 El Camino. So thank you. Do we have additional public comment?
Yes, we do, Chair Price. I have a member of the public. Sorry, I don't have the last name, but Judy, I have been able to unmute you. You should be able to speak.
Hi there. I can hear you. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, this is Judy Rocchio. Hi, everybody. I'm just glad to hear that you've got such great progress on planting the trees, but I do have one concern about, I'm sorry, I came late to the meeting, so I didn't hear the whole presentation. I caught the last end that talked about non-native trees and their additional water need, and that the city had approved those trees. And I'm wondering, shouldn't we be planting native drought tolerant trees, especially now during climate change? So given that that's the case, maybe the future plantings we can do a little better and plant natives. I know some of those non-natives grow just as well, but it's not the same. Different species appreciate native trees better than non-natives. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. I also want to thank Mayor Mueller for his foresightness and for all of you for carrying through with this plan. And then just a little plug to not forget to replant the trees at the Willow Road and El Camino exit. I mean, Willow Road and 101 exit. Still wondering when you're going to get money to do that. But I'll be watching, and hopefully I can help, come up with some ideas to get some more money. I know you were looking for something like 20 million. That seems like a lot. Anyway, I'm done with the commenting now, and I appreciate all your hard work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Judy. We appreciate your public comment. I know that part of the delay in the replanting was in looking for funding, and I believe that the funding, we can get an update on where that is and for a future meeting. So thank you for that comment as well. Ms. Lucky, are there any other comments at this time?
I do not see any other hands raised at this time. You may continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Martineau and Briones for coming to our meeting today. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having us. And, we can talk about trees at length. So please don't hesitate to invite us again, including about the replanting of the Sandhill overpass. We had been part of some of those discussions at one time. We were hoping that we could help with this with some state funding that we have. It might end up being too late for that particular funding, but we're interested in helping with that as well. With that, good night, everyone, and thank you again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you both for coming. We really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Take care.
Would anybody like to start the discussion, or does anybody have any further discussion on this? I know I think we'd had one item that came up as discussion during the clarifying question section that was around how to take an action item or how to consider an action item regarding the communication to the rest of the community about the trees being replanted. So that's where I believe we had some action item. But I know, Rebecca, this is an informational update. So I don't think there's a formal discussion, but we did have that clarifying question that action item that I wanted to flag. So I'm not sure what the best way to proceed is.
Yes, so I mean, there is no action for the Environmental Quality Commission, but I mean, you can discuss and then potentially agenda size future kind of discussion on something that you would like to speak on.
Okay.
Or recommend to City Council going forward.
Okay. That sounds good. So we'll just I'll make sure we capture that as a future item to consider. Is there a way to communicate about this, and we can go from there?
Well, and yeah, and sorry, just to be clear, I was taking notes as well to follow up with the city staff of how can we potentially post on the city website.
Okay.
Or get more outreach to residents in the Bellhaven neighborhood to understand like what it entails to have Canopy come and plant a tree and what kind of commitments and
perfect.
Yeah, logistics.
Thank you. No, that's perfect. Thank you. And Commissioner Gaillard?
Yeah, I just want to, again, this has really been weighing on me because we're responsible for trees in the city. The die off of the redwoods is just very striking with the drought. I mean, I drive around town and the tops of so many redwood trees are they're dead. So I assume those trees will have to be taken out and that they're like a fire hazard potentially as we get into fire season. I just want to make a request for if Mr. Bonner can speak to this now or at some point, like, are we really in our planning, are we taking into account the drastic change in the climate that's coming? So much more drought and higher heat, higher temperatures. So if it can't be addressed at this meeting, I'm going to keep raising it because I think it's really important.
It also sounds like perhaps that's a future agenda item to discuss, learn about how the planting plans that the city is generating may evolve to address climate change and the changing climate in this area. Because as Canopy was explaining, when we do, and as Christian has presented to us, we do maintain the urban canopy with a planned planting cycle. And so I think understanding that or having a discussion about what goes into that, the planned planting plans would be helpful. And Commissioner Cabot?
Yes, related to the city's outreach efforts on finding more folks who would like to have the trees planted on their property or on the city property adjacent to theirs. Perhaps maybe just taking some pictures of the trees as examples and having, some kind of an adopt a tree program where people can, get excited about wanting to be the home for a tree like the one in the picture.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts on this agenda item before we conclude and move to the next item? Okay, I don't see any hands or gestures. So we can conclude item D2 and move on to item D3. This is the item to amend the Environmental Quality Commission's work plan to include consideration and recommendation of gas-powered leaf blower ordinance in 2021, and we have a staff report. And so, Rebecca, would you like to present the staff report?
Sure, I could give a brief on the report. So I know a lot of commissioners have attended the City Council work plan meetings because there was a lot of discussion about the climate action plan and prioritizing those actions in the annual city council work plan. But it's also an opportunity for other community members to come to the meeting and express, desires of how the city could improve quality of life or address some other issues that the community is experiencing. And there was quite a few requests that came in from the community about the desire to ban gas-powered leaf blowers to enhance the quality of life in Menlo Park and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there were quite a few members making that connection that gas-powered leaf blowers do contribute to climate change. And there was also quite a bit of discussion amongst the council members about the complexity in implementing a ban itself, the ability to enforce a ban to achieve the desired outcome for the community, and understanding the role of incentives and equity to help companies or firms that perform landscaping or use leaf blowers to transition to electric leaf blowers, and technology and just legislation from the state and air districts potentially on phasing out gas-powered leaf blowers. So as a result of all that, the city council came to a consensus really to direct the Environmental Quality Commission to review and consider recommendations to come back with to the city council on what the city could do in regards to gas-powered leaf blowers and an ordinance specifically. And so typically when the council is referring items to the Environmental Quality Commission or any other commission, it's advisable to include it in your work plan so that there's a tracking and acknowledgement of the city council's assignment to the commission on that front. And as I mentioned before, the climate action plan, there's the 6 actions in our climate action plan that are high priority, and those have been heavily prioritized. So it makes it very difficult to dedicate staff resources to exploring this topic at this time. And so I just want to also acknowledge that it's going to be a lift from the commissioners to research. Again, staff is available to ask questions. You can ask us, what's legally doable or the history behind it. But I know Commissioner Elkins, you've been we've had conversations on this in the past too, and kind of where the history is on it. So that's the brief I wanted to give you on it. And then just to let you know that the work plan that has been approved by the Environmental Quality Commission hasn't been approved by the council. It was scheduled to be approved this month, but given the direction from City Council, it's best to try to include it so that way there's not a separate action that has to be taken at the council meeting to include it, and also to give you an opportunity to review where this fits in your work plan over the next 2 years. I did provide some sample language to include in the work plan. It's not in any way, shape, or form meant to say that it has to be in that language or, on that timeline. I was just trying to reflect the council's desire, but it can certainly change, and you could provide the rationale to City Council as to why, it may be different, or provide another explanation on that. And that concludes my brief. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, before we move to public comment on this item, does anybody have any clarifying questions based on, it looks like we have a clarifying question already. Janelle.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering if we had ever established in our greenhouse gas inventory what % of greenhouse gases come from our leaf blowers? Like at any time?
No.
We've never included that in the inventory.
Right. And with inventories, we're only able to capture what's, I would say, easily measurable. And easily, I use that term very loosely because it's not always easy to get the information. And so it's very difficult to define those emissions. We'd have to make a lot of assumptions based on that and not quite clear on the accuracy of it.
Okay. While we're talking, I might look at and see if there's a US or global indication of what percent in general leaf blowers add to the emissions inventory. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is a commissioner able to answer a clarifying question?
If you feel like you have an answer, go for it, Josie.
Okay, I have done the math on this, and the leaf blowers produce a lot of particulate pollution, so lung irritants. But on the climate front, it's very small. And articles and people who state that this is a big greenhouse gas issue or a big climate issue are just, they're getting two gases confused, nitrous oxide and nitrogen dioxide, I think is the two. Anyway, one is a potent greenhouse gas, which leaf blowers do not emit, and one is a lung irritant.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Okay, then what we can do is move on to public comment. So Ms. Lucky, do we have any public comments on this item at this time?
Thank you, Chair Price. So at this time, if there are any members of the public or in attendance and wish to provide public comment, you can use the raised hand feature next to your name in the participants list or attendees list, if that shows for you. And I will be able to unmute you. If you're on a landline or a cell phone, you can press *9 and I'll also be able to unmute you at that time. And with that, I do have one hand raised from Ms. Judy Rocchio, I'm sorry. I have unmuted
Okay,
you.
yes. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, the leaf blower issue has been a big concern of mine since I moved into Menlo Park almost 30 years ago. I was one of the original creators of CALM, Citizens Against Leaf Machines, and that was in the 90s. We went to ballot with that, and it was a 49-51 result. And even then it was almost, 50-50 people that are pro leaf blowers and people who aren't. But I think since the 90s, we've learned that there are a lot more reasons why leaf blowers are a problem, and not just because of climate change. Quality of life is a big concern. Noise pollution is a huge irritant. I would hate for this leaf blower ordinance to only be tied to climate change, because as we just heard, the gas emissions from leaf blowers are negligible related to other big sources for climate change. However, the particulate emissions are a concern. So you've got the double whammy. You've got the stuff coming out of the engine, and then you've got the dust and dirt that they blow around all over the neighborhood. So it's bad for the people that use them. It's bad for the people that have to hear them. It's not good for the plants. Plants get blown all over the place with leaf blowers. Leaf blowers in general, I think, were probably one of the worst inventions ever. And the more that you guys can do to reduce the use of leaf blowers would be appreciated by a lot of people. I think the people that like leaf blowers are just the ones that have gardeners that complain about using rakes and brooms. However, rakes and brooms would be a lot easier for those gardeners' lungs and backs. So I would hope that we can do an ordinance that will reduce the use of leaf blowers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. We really appreciate your comments. Do we have another public comment?
Thank you, Chair Price. Here, let's see. I do have another hand raised, Mr. Randy Avalos. I've muted you. You may have to unmute yourself to be able to speak. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to thank you all for your time. I want to reiterate support for moving leaf blowers. It is quite harmful to the neighborhood, to children walking the street. Every time we have to walk down the street, we have to cross over, and also our wildlife. It has quite an effect. So whatever can be done to reduce leaf blowers would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Randy. We really appreciate your comment. Do we have any additional public comment at this time, Rebecca?
No, we do not have any additional public comments. Thank you.
Okay. We can return the meeting then to, at this point, we can have a discussion on the item. Does somebody have a place they would like to start the conversation?
I guess I'll start. So I personally really dislike gas powered leaf blowers. And in my own house, I bought an electric leaf blower and I keep it at my house, and the folks who do my gardening use that. And I've been doing that for maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So I feel very strongly about this for myself and what I want to be contributing or not to my neighborhood. I think my main concern, and so I would love if we could snap our fingers and pass this ordinance. I think we would do it, and I would vote for that. My main concern is we have a climate crisis, maybe even a climate catastrophe, which is upon us, and we have limited staff, and we have a council whose agenda is so packed that it's just hard to get another thing on the agenda. The outreach that would be needed to pass this, the staff time to do the public outreach, it's just like, it seems like a huge lift, and it will take away from us addressing climate change in the city. And so for that reason, I would not support this receiving staff time or council attention. That would be my preference. So at least this year, until we have some progress on climate policies.
Thank you. Are there other discussion? And Janelle, is your hand raised again?
Yes.
Or is it? Okay, perfect. Go for it.
Yeah. I completely agree with Josie. While I absolutely despise leaf blowers, the noise just makes me crazy. I hate all the crap that they spew out. I actually don't even like electric leaf blowers because they still spew stuff into the air. And so I actually don't like any leaf blowers at all. That said, we're in a race against time for the future of our habitability on this planet. We are looking at a wildfire season that will be equal to, if not worse than last year's. And so that, to me, and we're looking at sea level rise in the next 20 to 30 years that could render our roads like Highway 101 impassable. So we are looking at widespread extreme catastrophe. And I feel like we have to stay focused on trying to do our best to be a leader city and set an example for other cities of actually taking real needle moving action on the climate crisis that is upon us. And for that reason, I feel like this will divert really critical resources that we need to solve the big problems. And so therefore, while I despise leaf blowers with my every cell, I think we should stay critically focused on the climate crisis and setting an example for other cities.
Thank you. Commissioner Elkins.
Yes. Thank you for those comments. I understand your points completely, but I do think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't think that this is a very big lift, and that given the public sentiment and the clear desire to do something about it, that it's our duty to do so. The council itself has referred it to us and didn't say, to your point, that of their time, they didn't say we don't have time for this, so let's not refer it to the EQC. They did refer it to us, and I don't believe that there's really that much that needs to be done. The research is out there. It just needs to be gathered together and discussed in 1 or maybe 2 meetings. Staff time would not be necessary. Rebecca has already stated that there wouldn't be any available. So I, for one, am willing to volunteer to be on that subcommittee and to do what work needs to be done. I'm not completely there myself, but if anybody else would join me, then I think we'd have it right there. So I would support adding this to the work plan.
Thank you, Leah. And Commissioner Cabot.
Thank you. I think my fellow commissioners are making great points, and the council has asked that we add this to the work plan. And so my thought is having it added to the work plan would probably create a subcommittee of which some commissioners may want to join up, and then work on a proposal that recognizes the problem of leaf blowers, and including gasoline powered leaf blowers, but the other ones are problems too, and crafts some kind of proposal in light of our understanding of the myriad of problems we face and the myriad of problems produced by leaf blowers. But my thought is it looks like there are likely to be commissioners who would propose some way to address leaf blowers in a well thought out manner. And I would support adding this to the work plan to see if a subcommittee could form that would address it and create a solution that could be brought to the commission for further consideration.
Thank you, Tom. Do other people want to speak or add to the discussion? So I can add my sentiment. My concern is more around the fact that it often seems like there should not be a lot of lift that is required for things that the city takes on, and that usually proves not to be the case. And so that's the only kind of caution I would add, is just that I would make the assumption that there will be required time, either from staff or from other resources, or both, that are needed to move something like this forward, simply based on past experience, not necessarily based on this particular issue at hand. But I've been surprised over time of what really does require, as a city, what does require use of staff time and of resources in general. So I would caution us in making an assumption that it doesn't, but I also agree that we have had a number of public comments. I do think there is a lot of public interest in this area. So I think it makes sense for us to have this discussion and to consider it. So that's where I stand. Commissioner Elkins.
I guess I'm just a little confused because if the city council asked us to look at this issue, can we come back and say no?
Well, we can come back and say, in terms of what our recommendation would be as the Environmental Quality Commission, we would not see this as being a top priority issue due to whatever the reasoning is. So I think there is that flexibility. I think that there usually is that kind of flexibility when you're considering an item. So I would guess that applies in this case as well. That doesn't mean that the city council would necessarily not do anything, but that could be the viewpoint of the commission.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would just add, I think there might be flexibility on when the Environmental Quality Commission would bring forward a recommendation, but it is an assignment that's been given by the city council to the commission. And so I think you're both right in the sense, but I would probably advise more on it. It's been given to the Environmental Quality Commission and it does need to be included in some capacity. Now, how it gets accomplished or when, I think that's the more flexible part.
James.
And I think, sorry, and I would just add too, like probably in providing a recommendation to city council, it could be that more staff resources are needed, maybe not necessarily from sustainability, but it could be, potentially another department to take it up as well.
I think that is a question though. Sorry, James. I was just, what department does this fall under?
So, I mean, typically it would fall under enforcement. But in these kind of situations, sometimes it's a very specialized kind of ordinance. And when in my career, I've seen it more head up by the city manager's office. I try to remember like when we had the downtown smoking ordinance that was
Okay.
basically done at a city manager level because it didn't really quite fall into any department or
Right.
involved coordinating with lots of different departments.
Okay. And thank you. And James.
Yeah, I think everybody's made a lot of great points here. There's a lot to weigh on sort of on both sides. I mean, first of all, sort of, as you said, we've heard a lot of community input on this issue, and we know this is an interest of council as well. And I think it would be good for us to show that we're responsive to that interest from the community and council, especially as we are, trying to make such strong recommendations for the community and council to make big lifts on other areas of climate change as well. And then just from a personal level, I think actually it sounds like we're all probably pretty in agreement on personally supporting a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers. I'm especially concerned about the health impacts on workers who have to be exposed to these many hours every day. And then it's just a third point. I know that there's a state bill to consider banning gas-powered leaf blowers, maybe all lawn equipment in general, but I think mostly just leaf blowers. And it was introduced, I think, by our local assembly member, Mark Berman. So also just sort of, it would be, as we talk about catalyzing action, it would be a nice sort of symbolic show if our locality showed that this was something that a lift that we're willing to do if, again, the whole state is being asked to do it as well. All that being said, those are all reasons I would support this, but I'm also very concerned about, as you said, things that seem like they aren't a big time commitment often turn out to be much larger, both our time and staff's time, both of which are very limited. But yeah, I would be supportive of amending this to follow council and the community's request, especially if we can find a way to minimize, hopefully, the amount of time needed going forward.
Rebecca, am I right that just like with the looking at phasing gas out of buildings, there'd have to be like a cost effectiveness study done by a consultant, and there'd have to be a series of, we haven't even gotten to that point. It's been a year that we've been working on something for buildings, and we've hired consultants, and we still don't have a report yet, but over $200,000 have been spent so far on that project. I'm looking at, it seemed like it would have to be a very similar process. And what's ahead of us on that one is, series of public meetings, and that would have to be documented, multiple reports go to council. It seems like a similar effort would need to be done on this one. Am I right?
Yes, it would be similar, but I think the only difference I would say is, for the cap number 1, that's a very innovative approach. We're I wouldn't say starting from scratch, but there's not a lot of communities that have actively had a existing building requirement for building electrification, whereas for leaf blowers, there is, information out there already. I think the question is the public engagement component of it, particularly for those involved in the industry of landscaping and what those reactions are, and making sure we understand the technology, whether it's up to par with what's needed to make the transition so that we're addressing equity. I think that'll be the bigger conversation in this, who can make that transition to the technology. And then just the enforcement component. Will there be a cost to the city to enforce this, to make sure it's successful? And I think the last bit is, I know it says that the council is looking for a leaf blower ban ordinance, but the research that the Environmental Quality Commission does could point to, well, maybe there's other ways of achieving this. Maybe there's a timeline. Maybe the city, provides some other kind of program to make it doable. I think there's lots of creative ways. and then again, potentially addressing having a requirement as well. So I think that's probably, I don't want to speak for the city council, but it's just looking at ideas of how can we get there in an equitable way that improves quality of life and addresses the issues that the community has, and what would it cost the city. So I think from that point forward, then the city council can decide whether they want to put resources toward it or make trade-offs. As I think some of you are pointing out, would that mean trading off some climate action plan priorities in order to accomplish this?
And just so we're clear, what stage would a recommendation need to be at to meet the request by city council?
So it would be getting the Environmental Quality Commission approval. So if there is a subcommittee formed and it's a recommendation's made, it could be, a memo. And then at that point, staff would take that memo and kind of identify, okay, so here's the Environmental Quality Commission's recommendation. Here's what we think is needed in order to execute that recommendation, whether it's more staff resources, a cost effectiveness study. So we would just basically bullet point what we would need to achieve that if the council wanted to approve the Environmental Quality Commission's recommendation.
Understood. Thank you. I think I saw Commissioner Payne's hand and then Commissioner Cabot. So Commissioner Payne.
Sorry, I think I just forgot to lower my hand from before. Tom can go ahead.
No problem. Go ahead, Commissioner Cabot.
All right, thank you. It seems like we're able to have a pretty good discussion of the matter here just among ourselves. And I kind of picture taking the recommendation literally, which is that we include this in a work plan, which would then, I think, be part of creating a subcommittee. And by the way, I would not want to be on that subcommittee. And that subcommittee would go off and develop a proposal that was sensitive to the types of things that this community is feeling and understanding and needing to prepare for with the climate catastrophe that's growing around us. And that subcommittee would come back and make a proposal to the full commission, and that the full commission would vote on what to recommend to the council. So I don't see creating this as part of the work plan as being the same thing as introducing it as a competing measure with the work that's needed on the climate.
Thank you, Commissioner Cabot. Are there any other?
I guess that's, I was gonna say, I guess that's a point well taken. It's like, if we accept it onto our work plan, we have to, what we're committing to is at some point, a subcommittee forming and doing work on it and updates to council. And at some point, a recommendation being voted on within EQC, whether to go, to be passed on to council. So with that in mind, I'd be fine with this coming onto the work plan. And, if Commissioner Elkins and anyone else wanted to work on a recommendation that would come back to EQC, I would be fine with that. But I just want to be very clear that I do think that this is will require, like when it comes back to EQC, one of the things I'm going to be keeping my eye on is what kind of resources this will require, and in a constrained environment, resource constrained environment, how it competes with something which I think is the climate issue, which I think takes priority.
Thank you. And one question I had is, if we are adapting this into the work plan, could we also create a subcommittee? Rebecca, is that something that we can do as we're having this conversation?
Yes.
Okay. So we can, so if this is something, as we're, taking motions and things like that, just to keep in mind that we could actually create that subcommittee now as well. Are there other areas of discussion or? does somebody, would somebody like to put a motion forward? If there's no more discussion, or do we have other discussion? I can put a motion forward. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Elkins.
Yeah, I can make a motion that we incorporate the leaf blower, the consideration of a leaf blower ordinance or some other method of addressing community concerns surrounding gasoline powered leaf blowers to the work plan, and to then create a subcommittee to address that issue.
Can we, Rebecca, is it possible to include who would serve on that subcommittee during this meeting?
Yes.
So before we go further with the motion, I don't know if there are volunteers outside of, I believe Commissioner Elkins, you volunteered to be on the subcommittee. Are there other volunteers for this subcommittee should we pass this motion? Okay, so the subcommittee may be a subcommittee of one. I personally have too much on my plate right now. So I cannot take that on, but I'm always happy to help in any way. So given that, can we modify the motion to include that? Is that something you would feel comfortable with, Commissioner Elkins? Oh, I think you muted yourself when you
muted myself.
That's okay.
I'm muting myself. Yes, that's fine. I can be the sole representative of the subcommittee at this point. And,
okay.
Or forever, however it turns out.
Thank you. So does somebody want to second the motion that Commissioner Elkins?
I second.
Okay, and now we can vote on a roll call led by Rebecca Lucky.
Thank you, Chair Price. So the motion by Elkins and seconded by Commissioner Cabot is to amend the work plan as proposed and create a subcommittee consisting of Commissioner Elkins.
Correct.
And with that, I will take roll call. Commissioner Cabot?
Aye.
Commissioner Elkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Price?
Aye.
Commissioner Gillard?
Aye.
Commissioner Payne?
Aye.
And Commissioner London?
Aye.
And motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, just one thing. My point about the greenhouse gas emissions, I've heard on the dais council state incorrectly that this is like a big contributor to climate change. So I guess I would like to request that as it's written in the work plan, that one of the benefits, it says reduce greenhouse gas emissions. While that's true, I feel like it's misleading and it's sort of reinforcing this error. And so I'd like to request that be, small, minimal reductions in greenhouse gases, somehow that there's a recognition, sort of an attempt to correct this misperception. Right now it says reduced greenhouse gas emissions.
Is that something that we can change at this time?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I was trying to take the notes.
That's okay. So the question from Commissioner Gaylord is that the phrasing of the item on the work plan, we need to ensure its factual accuracy in regards to the contributing factor to climate change versus the contributing factor to health in the community. So we discussed, okay. So
yeah, just let me know. So you want to strike the language about reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I would either strike it or say minimal reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, just to signal that it's very small contributor.
It is a lung irritant is the correct, as we understand it, is the correct term for the impact of the particular gas. And so there is a hazard to the community, but it is a health hazard regarding a lung irritant as opposed to a gas that affects climate change.
Yes, and I could phrase it as, other or air pollutants in general, which it does fall under the Environmental Quality Commission
Exactly.
scope.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, got it.
Because as we have discussed previously, these issues can get very technical and then it can get very confusing. And so trying to be clear is important. Commissioner London?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, is the instruction to ban it, to come up with an ordinance banning gas-powered leaf blowers or all leaf blowers? Because we talked about there's the 2-stroke and the 4-stroke engine and all the pollutants that come out of that, but there's also the pollutants that come from actually physically blowing leaves around, even with an electric blower.
I think it's for the subcommittee to figure out, would be mine.
Okay, so we didn't receive an instruction on how to, like, what exactly is supposed to be banned.
So the staff report reads, under the background paragraph, the staff report indicates the main reasons identified for considering this, and it includes noise, health and safety risks, environmental impact. In addition, the complexity to enact a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers was acknowledged, such as addressing equity, technology, and feasibility issues in using electric-powered leaf blowers, the ability to enforce the ban on the desired community, and the outcome for the community. So I think there is a broad approach that—
Okay, sorry, I think I missed that. Yeah, okay, that's pretty clear. Thanks.
No problem.
And then I'll just note for the record, as I was kind of hunting around, and I'm sure you guys know this, but this was an issue in Menlo Park in 1998. Anyway, so it looks like it's quite controversial.
Or it was.
Or it was then, yeah, who knows? Maybe it's not controversial now. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure everybody else knows that. All right, great.
Thank you. And before we go on to item D4, I'm hoping we can quickly address item D5 and do this a little out of order. Can we do that, Rebecca?
Yes, it's up to you, Chair Price.
Okay, I would like to do that just because I believe that item is a very quick item, and I know oftentimes people have hard stops, and so I want to take care of that, and then we can move on to the discussion of the recommendation for climate actions in the fiscal year ahead. So item D5 is the discuss rescheduling the June 16th EQC meeting. And with that, would you like to share what if there's a proposal from staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair Price. So we do need to reschedule the June 16th meeting due to staffing limitations during that week. So we could either go to June 9th or June 30th as potential dates.
So that is what is on the table. Thank you. Does anybody have any clarifying questions on this before we take public comment?
Oh, I should also add too, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Wednesday as well. So there's another potential day.
Either of those weeks, but we do.
Yeah.
Do we not have to be cautious of overlapping with the Zoom?
This is true. Yes.
Okay.
So preferably on the Wednesday, so the 9th or the 30th. Thank you, Chair Price.
You are welcome. So that is the proposal in front of us. Does anybody have any clarifying questions? So preference is Wednesday evening because of the limitations of the Zoom account, to ensure that there aren't multiple people trying to use it at the same time, which it does not accommodate. So we're proposing the regular time, but and during those 2 different weeks of June, the 9th or the 30th. Are there any clarifying questions? Okay. Ms. Lucky, do we have any public comment on this item at this time?
So at this time, if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on this agenda item, we are going a bit out of order right now. We'll get to item D4 soon, but we're on D5, which is rescheduling the Environmental Quality Commission's meeting for for June. And if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. It's a feature next to your name in the participants list. If you're on a landline or a cell phone, you can press *9 and I'll be able to unmute you as well. And with that, I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you. So returning the meeting, is there any discussion on the item, or does somebody, yes, Commissioner Cabot?
I'm thinking it may be beneficial to move the meeting forward to the 9th as opposed to lagging it to the 30th, in case there is anything that we would like to have in front of council earlier in the summer.
Thank you.
Eek, I'm so sorry. I was just looking. Thank you, Chair Price, for reminding me. And it looks like the Complete the Streets Commission is on the 9th. So
We are going to explore other options potentially for that. Is there other options that week?
there could be, yes. Let me just go back here.
And just in case, as a backup, does the 30th, is that not an option for anybody, just to ensure that we would have quorum at that meeting? Obviously, we would have a new member as well. But aside from that person who's not here, who is anybody else not able to attend if the meeting happened to be on the 30th? Okay. So as a backup option, the 30th is feasible for everyone on this call. Great. So
it looks like June 10th is workable. As a potential option. That's a Thursday.
Now, going back to the preference for that week, is Thursday, June 10th an option for everybody?
Should we raise hands if it works?
Yeah, raise your hand if it works. We're still, I think we're waiting for 2 people to figure out if it works.
Yeah, sorry. Give me
That's
one quick
okay.
second.
No problem. We're just waiting. Okay. We have 5. We may not have.
Right,
6.
I may have a conflict, but hopefully not. So I'll give it my best.
Okay. So and with that quick assessment, does anybody want to make a motion about this item?
I would like to move to reschedule our June 16th meeting to June 10th.
And if I may, Chair Price, I'm sorry, you guys are going really quickly, which is great on this item, but maybe just in case to reserve a second date if the June 10th doesn't work out, can we just make sure that
As
maybe
a second date?
Yeah, because I'll recheck with everybody too, probably like a week before the meeting, just to make sure we've got a quorum, because it's just out of
I think let's
our normal
have
time.
June 30th as the backup option, because we know that also works, but our preference obviously is June 10th.
Mm-hmm.
So with that modification to the motion, are you comfortable with that, friendly? Okay.
Yes.
I would second that motion, and we can vote by roll call.
Okay, so the motion is to reschedule the June meeting to June 10th instead of June 16th as a first priority, and a second choice of June 30th.
Correct.
And that was motioned by Commissioner Gillard and seconded by Price. I'll
Yes.
take roll call. Commissioner Cabot?
Aye.
Commissioner Elkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Price?
Aye.
Commissioner Gillard?
Aye.
Commissioner London?
Yes.
Commissioner Payne?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay. Obviously that was important to go through since it's our next meeting. So thank you everybody for accommodating my request. Now we will return to item D4, the discussion of the Climate Action Plan Subcommittee's recommendation for climate action in fiscal year 2021-2022 with the attachment. And
I have some slides if you want.
That's what I was gonna say. I I'm going to turn the meeting over to Commissioner Gaylor, who has slides to present to everybody to introduce this item, and then we will ask clarifying questions.
Can everybody see my screen?
Oh, you might have frozen, Josie, which maybe that messed it up.
Oh.
Okay, can you see my screen?
No.
Oh, no.
We're getting there.
How about now?
No.
I'm laughing because every time that happens, I think of the old Verizon commercials where the guy's like, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?"
Okay. Still now?
No.
Okay.
I don't see anything.
All right. Let me try this again. How about now?
There we go.
Yep.
Okay, I think that was user error, actually, sorry. Okay, so if you remember last meeting, the EQC decided to form a subcommittee, and it was actually reforming the subcommittee from last year of Tom, James, and me to, now that we're coming out of COVID, to go back and look at the climate action plan and the goals that the city set, which was a 90% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and a further removal of 10% through direct carbon sequestration by that date, to take that goal and to go back and assess what the action should be for the coming fiscal year 21-22, and to also look at, you know, coming out of, we recommended a very pared down set of actions due to the pandemic. It wasn't our original plan, but we wanted to be responsive to the situation on the ground in the city, which was resource constraints. Now looking ahead as we come out of COVID, that picture is shifting with recent, you know, stimulus money that's coming to the city. The financial picture just looks different, looks better. So kind of going back to a fuller understanding of the plan and a fuller understanding for council and staff and the commission of what will be required to meet the goal. Okay, so this is a slide you all have seen many times before, which is showing the reductions we need to make. This is what was adopted last year for actions in fiscal year 2020, 2021. You all are familiar with these six actions. Just a reminder, our profile of our greenhouse gas emissions, it's over half vehicles, and about a third of the city's emissions, at least in 2017, which is when this is from, were from natural gas coming from buildings. Okay, so the subcommittee met, and you know, the last year since we drafted the plan, the science is, it's not positive on climate. It's very sobering. You know, we continue to experience the effects of climate here locally with wildfire season now, which is becoming an annual event, unfortunately. And, you know, scientists are recording massive melting events at the polar ice caps. So we're getting closer to those tipping points. On the positive side, at the federal level, the Biden administration has recommitted to Paris, whereas the Trump administration had withdrawn the US from the Paris Climate Accords. So the US is back in it. But we sort of lost 4 years there of having any sort of coordinated federal approach. So again, so the outlook right now is pretty bleak. On the city side, although we passed the city adopted the bold goals, we actually have not yet implemented anything to, from a policy perspective or from a program perspective to actually reduce greenhouse gases. So we wouldn't be able to see an impact of any of the city's actions because none have been concrete yet. So currently, I'm not happy to report this, but Menlo Park currently is not on track to meet our adopted city climate goals. We are not on track to keep greenhouse gas emissions low enough to stay under 1.5 degrees C. And sadly, we're not even on track to keep our greenhouse gas emissions such that we could meet the 2 degrees C targets. And as a reminder, the Paris climate goals were to try to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees C and 1.5 degrees C to the degree possible. So 1.5 degrees C is very much preferred over 2 degrees C, but I think the folks who put together the targets for Paris recognize that achieving 1.5, we're roughly at 1.1 degrees C temperature rise today. So keeping it under 1.5 is going to be very difficult. So anyway, so the city, we're not on track to meet this goal. And so the subcommittee was really trying to think, how can we get on track and what is it we need to do? What are the set of actions to reach the 90% reduction? Okay, so you saw the slide last time, which is the drastic cuts that we need to make. The blue line is, where we are currently, and the orange line is where we need to get to, with that red dotted line, trying to sort of visually show what any sort of gas device with a long life, like a gas furnace, how it continues to emit at that higher level when we need to be making these drastic cuts. Okay, so in the memo, hopefully you all saw this graph that looks familiar to you. I think maybe I will hand it over to Commissioner Cabot to walk us through this one if he's willing to do that.
Sure, thank you. So this graph is looking at Menlo Park's buildings sector, so the natural gas used in buildings, and looking at measures, ideas, and programs and ordinances that would be, one set that could try to reduce things in accordance with trying to meet the 2 degree Celsius Paris temperature rise target. And just to clarify, I want the public to keep hearing this. The 2 degree rise has 4 times the damage and suffering of the 1.5 degree rise. It is not a linear thing. It's not just 1/3 worse. It is 4 times worse. So it is sobering to look at this chart, which I'll explain, and see the amount of work it takes to reduce our emissions and damages that'll be occurring down to the scale where they'll be 4 times worse than they'll grow to if we hit 1.5 degrees. So now starting at the top of the graph, that line is where our emissions kind of would have grown if we hadn't passed the first reach code. In fact, that gray line sloping up would have continued up towards the corner. Then the passage of Menlo Park's innovative reach code, which really truncates the installation of new gas devices in new buildings and remodels that are more than 3/4 of the building, that cuts that whole top gray wedge out of there. And so you can see a little bit of decline on the top of the brown line. That brown line represents, or the brown wedge would be an idea of the effect that PCE might be able to get if they continue offering their rebates on things like heat pump water heaters. And they currently have rebates on those that are amounting to around $2,000 each for those water heaters. The gray wedge under it is an idea if Menlo Park were to pass another reach code where any remodels, any substantial remodels, say over some limit, like let's say 50 square feet. Any remodels bigger than some small limit like that trigger whole house electrification or whole building electrification. So using remodels as the trigger for electrification. The next bright yellow wedge below, that's a representation of a replace on burnout ordinance, like is being explored in Cap Action 1. And that would be if it were, say, 20% effective, because so many heaters and water heaters go in without permits. It's hard to enforce these things. And then, so that's the dingier yellow wedge below it is, what if we also had some enhanced enforcement on the burnout ordinance? The green wedge below it is an idea to have an ordinance that would replace gas-fired devices when a home is sold. And on the order of 300 to 400 homes are sold in Menlo Park each year. So that would show this. That's why this is a slowly growing green wedge. And then the next, let's see, the next one below replace on sale is replace early. So offering an incentive, a very attractive incentive to try to get people to retire working equipment before it fails, and have them be happy with the incentive and want to do that conversion. And while many of us have always hoped that would be a big program, folks in Palo Alto who have tried it for years have noticed that it just does not produce much results. They get very little uptake per year on attractive incentives for early replacements. And theirs are actually, apply to burnouts as well. And that bottom orange slab down there is the concept of passing an ordinance, or either locally or by the state, some kind of an end of flow. And that is just that gas would no longer flow after a certain date chosen by either a local authority or the state, depending on if the state gets serious about preserving the climate. But that type of thing kind of truncates the rest of it. So you can see that in this example, I've had to array a large variety of programs in order to get to the 2-degree line. So what it's showing is there's substantial amounts of work to be done. And the thing I learned from doing all this modeling and building the model of the interactive effects of all these policies, and they all are applying to the remaining fleet of gas devices. So as you add one more policy and it becomes effective, it decreases the remaining fleet, which helps decrease this blue area to the left, which is the gas emissions, but it also competes with everything else. So it's a little bit of squeezing the balloon. Each new thing you introduce reduces both the problem and competes with the other solutions. So it appears that we do have quite a bit of work left to preserve a livable climate for our children.
Thank you, Tom. So this is a graph for vehicle emissions. So what we did was we looked at the two big sectors for the city. Vehicle emissions, again, are 56% and buildings are 34%. So we really focused our attention on those and kind of tried to understand what would the impact of various policies be. Tom, will you walk us through this one too? This is the overall picture, and then I have 2 slides breaking down the different types of buildings.
Yes, thank you. I'll go quickly through this one, then we'll look at the 2 sectors. This one is the combined multifamily and commuter traffic picture. Combine that with the single family residence cars. So it's like all of the cars in the inventory. So all of the emissions from vehicles, including commercial fleets, etc. So the green wedge at the top is VMT, vehicle miles traveled reduction policies, just some estimate of, maybe how effective those would be citywide. The big blue happy wedge that comes in there is non-Menlo Park factors that make electric, I should explain, other than the VMT reduction, all the rest of the reductions are from converting from fossil-fired transportation, fossil-fired ground transport to electric. So the big blue wedge is the inherent attractiveness of electric vehicles as they're becoming cheaper and they're getting longer ranges, and people are enjoying driving them. They are going to be taking over the market is one assessment that's reflected in here. The next thing that comes along is the golden wedge driven by Governor Newsom. And that represents the effect of not allowing any new car purchases that are fossil fired starting 2035. And so you can see 2035 is a sudden date, and it's that little point at the tip of that wedge. And the wedge slowly grows as cars expire and people buy the additional electric vehicles more than they would have bought just on the voluntary basis in the blue wedge above it. The next layer down, the gray layer from PCE, that's a representation of their impact on the uptake of electric vehicles. If not for their incentives of about $1,000 or $1,500 for many folks, that gray wedge wouldn't have been there. And then the brown wedge is a representation of what if Menlo Park were able to have some even more effective policies, say 3 times as effective as PCE was able to do, maybe through advanced parking advanced charging infrastructure requirements and things like that, that made it easier and easier to charge, so there's more natural uptake. And then the red line is another representation of the Paris type 2-degree line, and then the black line is our 2030 target of reduce our emissions to 90% by 2030. And next.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here and mention one thing, which is the policy levers for vehicles are very different from the policy levers for buildings at the city level. Mm-hmm. The city has direct control over what someone can permit for their building. The city does not have direct control over whether someone can register the type of vehicle that someone can register. That's a power that's held by the state. And so all of the policies that we would enact related to vehicles, at least that the EQC subcommittee has been able to identify, would be supportive. So they'd be indirectly supportive of making these transitions, be things like requiring charging in different places. And these can be hugely impactful, but they're indirect. So we can provide charging, but we can't force someone to buy the EV to use the charger. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Josie. This slide is a representation of part of the prior slide. So it's the emissions from the fleet of vehicles owned by the single family dwelling occupants. So not the multifamily and not the commercial. And so in this one, you can kind of see the VMT reductions are smaller. And that's just my assumption that it's harder to get the dispersed single family dwellers to take more trips by foot and bike than it is to get the more downtown concentrated multifamily dwellers to do so. However, they've got the single family homes have a lot more access to outlets to charge their cars in their garage. So the big blue wedge of the natural attractiveness of EVs is bigger than you'll see for the multifamily. And then the other program inducements are there. You can see the governor's wedge is small in this case. And if we can go to multifamily, we'll see the difference. And so in the multifamily case, so it's the complement of the the rest of that first whole transportation sector. And so for all the multifamily dwellings, so apartment buildings and condos and things like that, built near transit with a good transit program applied over the years and a good walkable cities and 5-minute city type design, we think maybe we can get some significant VMT reduction. And then the blue wedge is smaller than it was in the single family, much noticeably smaller. That's reflecting the problems that have been identified by staff and commission about the lack of charging in multifamily dwellings. And then here in this one, you see when the governor's choice comes on, the wedge, it is bigger there because the blue part wasn't able to do as much, but the governor says it doesn't matter if you can't get charging, you can't buy new new gas cars. So deal with it, find charging elsewhere. And then the gray one below is the PCE incentives and technical assistance. And then maybe Menlo Park can have some impactful policies on car charging to also help that out. And then you can see the red line down below. So that kind of takes us through the different graphs and different conceptualizations of what it's like to try to figure out where can the local government actions help problems in decarbonization in the different sectors. And as Josie mentioned, it looks like it's going to be more of the city's purview in the buildings and a little tougher in the vehicle side, but maybe some strong roles perhaps in EV charging. And in particular, the two areas, multifamily charging and daytime charging at workplaces. And to the extent we can strongly encourage daytime charging at workplaces, that gives renters a place to, or multifamily folks, a place to find charging at their workplaces. And for anyone, it gives a way to get cars charged during the time when our renewable resources are at their peaks and don't have to be stored during the day to charge cars at night. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tom. And I just wanted to make one more point. You can see on this slide 6, you can see the sort of the effects of delay in implementing policies. So, you can see for year 1 a point, and then year 2, year 3, we're looking at whatever policies might be implemented by Menlo Park, not starting until I think we assumed between year 2 and 3. So, but you can see how pushing out a couple of years really increases the area underneath that line, the size of the blue wedge. So anyway, I hope that point is clear. Okay, so the subcommittee came up with, sort of took a big step back and said, we proposed 6 actions for 2020, 2021, that fiscal year. But let's take a step back and now that we can think more holistically about the plan, how are we going to achieve these goals? So we broke it out by, sector that's contributing to greenhouse gases. So goal 1 would be to reduce emissions from buildings by 90%. Goal 2, reduce emissions from vehicles by 90%. Goal 3, from waste. So those are the kind of the big wedges of emissions, with the first one and the second one being, contributing about 93%, something like that. Goal 4 would be to sequester the remaining 10% of emissions, which that was part of our stated sort of overall goal for climate in Menlo Park. And then number 5 would be to develop those adaptation plans. So recognizing that, if we do everything perfectly, let's say we're able to, actually follow that dark blue line in those graphs, we've still set in motion some consequences that we will have to deal with through things like, seawalls and preparing for wildfire, et cetera. And then goal 6, we debated whether this might be rolled into goal 4 potentially, or even goal 1, but there's embodied emissions for industrial materials, primarily, although not exclusively, concrete and steel, which produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And so there are alternatives which actually sequester carbon in the materials, for example, for concrete. And so the city may have a way to sequester carbon in the sidewalks or require that these carbon sequestering materials be used in construction, for example. Okay, so we turned our attention also to the resources question, since that's at city council's level, they're thinking about budget and headcount, et cetera. So we wanted to give them some advice on that. And what we did is, Tom, James, and I have been sort of steeped in a lot of these questions and the research and like what's required potentially. We have a little bit of an idea now, having watched for the last 9 months, what it's like to consider, various climate policies and kind of what are the steps and what are the different skills that someone, the city needs to accomplish these things. And so we decided to sort of put all that together into one place for it to be used by staff or council, so that we can get a better idea of what are the skills that we need to do this. It was one thing for a city to pass a zero waste goal, let's say in the 90s or early 2000s, and there were certain skill sets required to advance those goals. It's really an entirely different set of skills that are needed to develop policy on climate change. It's much more technical. One needs to have a different understanding. Energy analytics are important. Being able to do sort of financial analyses, understanding engineering is really important. So there's a kind of a need for those skills, either within the city staff or brought on. But even if we bring those on in the form of consultants, it's important to have staff overseeing that consultant work that has enough of a technical understanding of some of these issues to be able to guide the work. The other thing that became clear in putting together this staffing matrix is, how cross-functional all this work is. So you can see to the right, sustainability, legal, public works, planning, public engagement, and IT. You can see that there are X's in all of those boxes and all those columns, denoting that this work will not be done in one department. It's going to be spread out across the organization if it's done, if we're actually able to do the work. So we don't have to go through each of these, but we just took all the 6 goals and we assessed for each recommended action what the skill set would be and potentially what department it might live in. And this is not meant to be some sort of like blueprint that gets handed over to staff. It's really meant to be, with our understanding of climate and with our understanding of sort of skills required to do this work, this is our best understanding of how the city might want to staff this work. And, the city would want to come up with something similar or their own version of this, I would think, in order to be able to start implementing these plans. So I'll just skim through this, but one of the things I thought was interesting when we sort of tally up all the X's in these in the staffing matrix at the bottom here, you can see, actually I think it's be clearer here, you can kind of see where there are skills required. So policy, that's a clear one, but we have 23 actions that require some engineering skill. So I thought that was really interesting. And then 21 actions that require some sort of like finance or financial analysis skills. Energy analytics, you can see there. The other big one here was stakeholder engagement. So a lot of policies that are going to need a lot of public buy-in and a lot of public comment and working with the public. And then again, at city departments there, you can see sustainability staff obviously are engaged in most of these policies, but then we have a lot of engagement on legal, and then a lot from public works, planning, and public engagement. So, okay, so I think this is pretty obvious. We originally, in the original plan, we were going to recommend 6 full-time equivalent, so not necessarily staff with full staff. It could be sort of temporary staff, but 6 full-time equivalents over a 3-year period to implement the climate action plan. I think that something like that is probably still required, although we didn't necessarily break it out into full-time equivalents. We sort of said, here are the skills that are required, here are the activities, and would leave it up to staff to figure out, how many headcount is that. But it's clear that just having Rebecca work on climate, and I think over the last year, it's just been a portion of her time, that just won't be enough to achieve the CAP goals. So I think it's important for EQC to make it clear to council that that's the case. And again, the subcommittee is seeing some gaps in these specific skills: engineering, energy analytics, financial analysis, and then just reinforcing this point about needing staff across departments who will have to coordinate their work in many ways. So it's cross-functional work, which is not easy to implement in an organization, but we see needs in public works, the building department for permits and policies and enforcement of policies, and then planning and transportation for VMT reduction, and then public engagement across all of these policies. So our proposal would be for the EQC, obviously, to deliberate, but to accept the CAP subcommittee's recommendation and send it along with any tweaks or edits to City Council for consideration in the council's upcoming budget deliberations. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So before we take clarifying questions, I didn't state at the beginning of the meeting, but I should have, that I do have to leave at 8:15 because I think everybody knows I have a new baby and I have a responsibility to go and feed the baby. So I'm gonna ask at this juncture, because I think it's a clean break, I'm gonna ask if Janelle can step in and lead the meeting chair the meeting at this time. And I would also like to add that depending on the structure or where the discussion goes, we can also know that there is a lot of urgency to this issue, and these are big discussion topics. So knowing now that we're meeting again in June, if we need to bring more discussions at that time, we can do that. So I just want to put that on the table before I leave. But I really appreciate Tom and Josie and James's work on this. I think that it's incredibly important, and the news is quite sobering. Anyway, so I am hopeful that there are many actions that we can take, and I'm also cognizant of the dynamic nature of those actions in terms of like the ecosystem that they exist in, right? Because it is difficult, I think, still to get some of this work done as an individual person, and I'm excited for what we can do to make that more straightforward for people to take the steps in their homes, etc., that they need to take. But anyway, so I am going to depart. I will leave you guys in good hands, and I will see you all in June.
Thanks, Ryan. I can stay, but only till 8:45, absolute latest. And I just wanted to say that Deb says farewell. She wasn't able to do a chat bye-bye, but she said thanks a lot. And anyway, so she just had to get off. Okay, so with that, do we have other folks who have a hard stop, so we kind of have a sense of how much time we have left?
Midnight for me.
Oh God, Tom.
I don't have a hard stop, but once we drop Josie, then we're down to 4, or we've lost our quorum.
4 is the quorum.
4 is still a quorum.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess if I have to drop at 8:45, we can just pass it on to the next person who wants to lead, and you guys can.
Oh, Janelle, you're the one who's leading. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Carry on.
All right. Do you guys have more to the presentation? Did you want to continue?
Nope, we're done.
All right. Let's see. Is it time to open this for public comment now? Or I guess first it's any clarifying questions. Is that correct? Any clarifying questions from the EQC?
I think it's just you and Leah because the other three.
Yeah, right. The rest of you guys are in on it. Yeah. Okay. I did not have any, but I did appreciate the fact that you took the time to really segment it into the needs and the skill sets that are going to be required. It is a daunting task, and gosh, I'm starting to feel like if we get any of it done, it'll be a friggin' miracle. Okay, any public comment? Or Rebecca, did you want to ask for public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair London. So for members of the public who are in attendance and who would like to speak on this agenda item, just a reminder, we are looking at climate action plan initiatives for fiscal year 2021-2022. You can use the raised hand feature next to your name. If you're on a landline or a cell phone, you can also press *9 to raise your virtual hand, and I'll be able to unmute you. And with that, I don't see any hands raised at this time. I return the meeting back to you, Vice Chair London.
Thank you. Okay. So I guess, is there a motion on this item?
I love moving right to a motion.
Well, I mean, wait, is there any further discussion?
Looks like Tom has a hand.
Okay, Tom.
Thank you. You know, we've laid out quite a bit of information there, and in it there is pursuing 6 goals, and it's a coincidence that that number 6 is similar to the number of 6 CAP actions from the first year of the Climate Action Plan. We essentially propose not replacing those. Those are underway and they need to keep going. These are the additional actions that need to start to produce, you know, the most value preservation that we can for the community, because we are in a slide and we need to demonstrate a way to arrest the slide and to start acting on the climate change so that other cities and the state can rise to take the actions that they need to meet their goals that are right now unacted upon.
Yeah, that's a good clarification, as we're not suggesting with these recommendations that like the first 6 just like the work stop. And we also aren't suggesting that all this new action take place with just one staff person. Clearly that would be completely unreasonable. And we don't, you know, we are not taking on the council responsibility of figuring out how many staff can be hired. And, you know, we are just saying if the city wants to meet its climate goals, this is what will be required. And, you know, and then the council would decide what to do with that. But we feel like someone needs to be saying very clearly, without reservation, what is needed to tackle this this really looming crisis.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to agree with what Josie's saying and put it into perspective of how we look at the EQC, that we are simply an advisory body. We don't, you know, we can't make, pass, or enforce policy. We can propose things and we can assess things. And this was our assessment of just looking at it and noticing there is much to do, and it will take many person hours in many skill areas across many departments. But we recognize we're not the ones to make those decisions, but the staff and the council are. And so but we have an obligation to get this information in front of them in a timely manner where they can start their work on it.
So I guess you guys have looked around at other cities and there's no one else where we could just kind of use what some other city has done. Is that right? Or were you just looking at really assuming that we're the leaders? What do we need to do?
At this point on these policies, we are, there's some other cities also looking alongside us. So I don't want to give the impression like that we're the only city in the whole United States doing this, but no city has done this where we could just draft behind them, just like copy and paste. That has not happened yet. But there are, 5 cities or so who are, looking at those graphs and saying, we need to do something. And there's not a whole bunch of different things you can do. So we're all kind of looking at the same things, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion regarding this report?
I could make a motion that we adopt the subcommittee's recommendations.
I will second that motion. Ms. Lucky, would you like to do the roll call?
Yes, just give me a second here. Okay, so I have a motion by Commissioner Elkins and seconded by Commissioner London, Vice Chair London.
Correct.
To recommend the EQC's CAP subcommittee recommendations to the City Council. Okay.
Can I just say one thing? We've had some other people read the memo and give us some comments. For example, some of the things that we verbally clarified for you all, which is we're not proposing that we replace the first 6. So would it be okay with you if we kind of put some of that clarifying language into the memo to go to the council? So that would be a slight, addition between what we've seen and what goes to council, but it wouldn't change the substance of the recommendation. It would just be sort of clarifying. We had a lot of work to do and we had a month to do it, and it's not perfect. So
you're suggesting in the introduction, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Same.
I would just suggest it would be clearer if you maybe attached a separate memo, or we could attach it with the report unless you really need to identify it within the report. Does that make sense? And is that doable?
Totally doable. Yep.
Okay, so the motion is to approve forwarding the subcommittee recommendations to the City Council with a friendly amendment to include a memo clarifying some of the, for lack of a better term, intentions of the report. Yeah. Okay. And with that, I'll take roll call. So Commissioner Cabot?
Aye.
Commissioner Elkins?
Aye.
Commissioner London?
Aye.
Commissioner Payne?
Aye.
Commissioner Gillard?
Aye.
A motion passes. Thank you. I return the meeting back to you, Vice Chair London.
Great, thank you. All right, next is staff and EQC member reports. So we're now taking any reports from any advisory body member or the staff since our last EQC meeting. Rebecca, would you like to start?
Maybe if I could go last. I'm still jotting down
Okay,
notes.
sure.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Well, I've got one. So for the Beyond Gasoline initiative, there is now a web page up on the Cultura website. So cultura.org, and then under programs, there's the Beyond Gasoline initiative. That is now live, and we welcome your feedback and any member of the public's feedback on that website. It aims to really direct people to kind of a new paradigm, which is to get an electric vehicle to replace their gasoline vehicle. And if they are able to do so now and not wait until their gas car dies. Part of what I noticed from the presentation that you guys gave is it probably assumes a certain natural turnover of vehicles, that people keep their vehicles until they normally trade them in. And just to explain, the effort is to ramp that up and get more EVs onto the roads faster by encouraging people to go ahead and do it now, not wait till their gas car dies.
And piggybacking on that, I was checking out the California Energy Commission updates once a year, their data on total EVs, and they break it down by city. So it turns out in Menlo Park that we now have 9% of all vehicles in the city registered are zero emission vehicles, which includes plug-in hybrids, 100% battery, and hydrogen fuel cell cars. So anyway, it's a good number. It's sort of on par with some European countries that are making this transition faster. It's not Norway, which is 75. Let's see.
Well, 16% of cars on the road.
So, yeah, right. So the other number, which we can't quite confirm yet because we're missing one denominator, but it looks like maybe new cars purchased in 2020, that 30% in Menlo Park were either plug-in hybrid or battery or fuel cell. So that's a really good number, 30% of new vehicles. And that is similar to Norway's, well, it's comparable to Norway's 75% number.
That's awesome. I don't really trust plug-in hybrids to do their job of displacing gasoline. So do you have the numbers broken down by just BEVs?
Roughly, it's like 2/3 of the ZEVs are BEVs. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
It's a high number, higher than 50%.
Nice.
So one other thing is there was a bill introduced, I believe it was in the California state, I think it was the Senate, but based on some research, realizing that California's current climate goals are not strong enough, and that 80% reduction by 2030 is really what we need to do to avert the 2 degree Celsius rise. So that's Palo Alto's goal. Ours is a little bit more even bolder, but there does seem to be some rallying behind that. And I wouldn't be surprised if California does move that date in from the current 2045 to 2030, which would be more aligned with where we are.
Excellent. Tom.
Yes, just to report on some news I'm seeing recently. I think it was yesterday, the International Energy Information or Energy Agency, a relatively conservative group, has come out with the finding that we cannot meet the Paris targets if we build any more fossil infrastructure, pipelines, and fossil power plants, etc. So the same thing we're seeing at the local level for what we need to be doing about our machinery that consumes the fuel, they're noticing on the global level about the machinery that produces and converts the fuel. So folks are starting to align around these ideas that we've been talking about, and there is a proposal for federal legislation to support a rapid electrification of America, and so a conversion away from fossil fired buildings. So building electrification. The White House cabinet level group met just, I think it was earlier this week, also for the first time having an in-depth discussion about building electrification and recognizing it as the major avenue to get the emission reductions they need. So they're starting to talk about the same things we've been talking about here for a couple of years. And so things are happening that it makes sense for us to keep an eye on and see what we can do to support both as individuals and perhaps to see if the city can weigh in supporting resolutions. The city or the mayor can weigh in supporting resolutions for federal action that creates the tailwinds that will make it easier for Menlo Park to preserve its future.
Great. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yes. Sorry, I was still taking notes. So just updates from the staff side, you know, we're continuing to work on the Climate Action Plan #1 in preparation to meet the City Council timeline approved for that cap action, and then preparing the progress report for the Climate Action Plan, so the GHG inventory and the metrics as well, and just progress in general on the cap action items, the 6 action items that have been approved. And let's see, and then the last update is really the RFP for the solar microgrid and battery storage. The RFPs, we had quite a few, we had a lot of bidders and questions, so we extended the deadline to submit to next week, I believe the 25th. So that's moving along, a lot of interest. So we've been spending our time just coordinating what the next steps are after the bids close and filtering the applications and getting to a short list in the early summer timeframe. So a lot of work around that as well.
Great. Yes, Josie.
Oh, Tom, I have the same question. I remember seeing on a staff report to council that the cost effectiveness study by TRC would be coming to EQC. I thought it was this month, but when will that be coming?
So it's scheduled for June. And so I'm meeting with the team this week to check in on where things are, what information. I know we're close, but I just need to check in with them before confirming. But that's the anticipation, with the overall goal of getting it to council in the summer as well, late summer.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Is there anything else? All righty. I think that brings us to the end of our meeting. And I will now, unless anyone would like to stop me, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.